The rats are leaving the Trump ship. Yes, several of Trump's alleged co-conspirators, or no, I guess verified, admitted co-conspirators at this point, are pleading guilty in Georgia. Our resident prosecutor and criminal law expert Scowlow explains what that means for Sidney Powell and others, but things have been happening just so fast and nobody wants to be the last rat on the ship. So stay until the end where I talk about immunity for Mark Meadows and Jenna Ellis taking a plea deal as well.
Sidney Powell, a former Trump lawyer and one of 19 defendants in the Fulton County election interference case, just pled guilty to improperly interfering in the 2020 presidential election. Powell shot to internet infamy after she appeared on Fox Business with a promise to release the Kraken, a reference to her belief that the election was stolen by a shadowy cabal of evildoers led by Dominion voting systems.
It's been organized and conducted with the help of Silicon Valley people, the big tech companies, the social media companies, and even the media companies. And I'm going to release the Kraken.
Powell vowed to expose the perpetrators and return Trump to the White House. She filed lawsuits in swing states across the country. However, every single one of her lawsuits crashed and burned, or should we say torpedoed and drowned? Because as it turns out, Powell didn't have a shred of evidence to support her frankly unhinged conspiracy theories. Yet every time the courts shot down Powell's theories, she doubled down on her claims, accusing everyone who disagreed with it of being in on it. Here she is accusing an Australian reporter of being undercover for Smartmatic.
What actual research or fact-checking did you do at the time to find out what Smartmatic's actual involvement in the election was?
Do you work for Smartmatic?
Powell walked out of that interview after she was confronted with her lies. When asked whether facts matter, Powell said,
Yes, they do. I hope we get to one of these days as to what really happened in our election and all the people who are responsible for it.
Well, guess what? We have finally figured out who was responsible for what happened in the election, and the call was coming from inside the House.
Are you pleading guilty today because you agree that there is a sufficient factual basis, that there are enough facts that support this plea of guilty?
I do.
Powell now admits that she was the one who broke the law, not Dominion, not Smartmatic. Two of her co-conspirators, lawyer Ken "The Cheese" Chesebro and bail bondsman Scott Hall, also pled guilty. Now that the dominoes are falling in Fulton County, what does this mean for Donald Trump? Once upon a midnight dreary, Fox News became the first network to project that Biden won Arizona. It was the right call, but it proved to be a ratings disaster.
I'm sorry, the president is not going to be able to take over and win enough votes to eliminate that 7-point lead.
Fox viewers viewed this as a betrayal, and they started to abandon the network. This created an opportunity for Sidney Powell, an imaginative lawyer with lots of conspiracy theories about voting machines. Powell appeared on network dozens of times, where she explained that Dominion and Smartmatic used an algorithm that flipped votes for Trump to votes for Biden.
That probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered had the votes for President Trump not been so overwhelming in so many of these states that it broke the algorithm.
To be clear, this is all poppycock. Behind the scenes, Powell had presented Fox News with a memo entitled Election Fraud Info that was written by an anonymous source who claimed the wind tells her she's a ghost. Fox hosts concluded that Powell was not playing with a full deck. Sidney Powell is a bit nuts, Fox host Laura Ingraham wrote to Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity on November 15th, 2020. Sidney Powell is lying, Carlson told his producer the next day. Nevertheless, Fox repeatedly turned to Powell to win its viewers back. She teamed up with Rudy Giuliani to promote the theory that the election had been stolen. In November, Powell met with other Trump loyalists and lawyer Lynn Wood's South Carolina estate, which happens to be a former rice plantation called Cotton Hall. The group included former Overstock CEO Patrick Byrne, Mike Flynn, and Doug Logan, the CEO of cybersecurity firm Cyber Ninjas. Logan would later be known as Individual 25 in the Fulton County case. The Trump gang enjoyed Thanksgiving dinner at Cotton Hall, where Mike Flynn was given the honor of carving the turkey. In between servings of mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce, the group brainstormed ways that Trump would still win the election. Wood remembers Powell making phone calls to Georgia and theorizing that the communist government of Venezuela played a role in Biden's victory. Eventually, they agreed that they needed to get their hands on digital copies of data and software used on voting machines. Meanwhile, down in Georgia, Powell's theories got the attention of election officials in Coffee County, Georgia, a rural county where over 70% of voters chose Donald Trump. Despite Trump's big win, local elections officials decided that someone had tampered with their voting machines. These officials included Kathy Latham, Misty Hampton, Eric Cheney, and Ed Voiles. They all agreed that the election had been rigged. Later, they would participate in an alleged conspiracy to give unauthorized people access to voting equipment. In December, Powell cited Coffee County to make her case to Donald Trump that the federal government should seize the voting machines. She helped draft 2 orders that would have authorized the seizure, citing Coffee County as proof that the orders were justified. On December 18th, Powell met with Trump and urged him to appoint her as special counsel to investigate voter fraud. Needless to say, Trump did not go forward with seizing the voting machines, but Powell and Giuliani hatched a plan to obtain the machines voluntarily. Powell already had a contract with a forensic company called Sullivan Stickler to inspect voting machines in Michigan. The Georgia indictment alleges that Powell also brought the group to Georgia. The indictment says Powell paid Sullivan Stickler for the purpose of willfully tampering with electronic ballot markers and tabulating machines, which were overt acts to affect the object of the conspiracy to interfere with the result. In December, Georgia completed a 3rd machine recount of the vote. However, Coffee County refused to certify the outcome, claiming an inability to repeatedly duplicate creditable election results. The county determined that its vote count was off by 51 votes. When the Georgia Secretary of State investigated, he found that the discrepancy was caused by human error, probably because Hampton couldn't remember if she scanned a stack of ballots twice or not. But the conspirators were not about to give up, and that's how they ended up co-defendants with Sidney Powell. On January 7th, the day after the riot at the Capitol, these local officials allowed people from Sullivan Stickler to spend hours examining voting systems in the county, as you can see in this security video. Powell allegedly paid them for their time. Scott Hall, a bail bondsman and future co-defendant, flew down from Atlanta to help. Once in the Coffee County Elections Office, the analysts copied Georgia's statewide voting system software. According to a recorded phone call, they scanned all the equipment, imaged all the hard drives, and scanned every single ballot.
We scanned every freaking ballot.
The defendants also took official ballots outside of the polling place. Well, as it turns out, Georgia law requires ballots to remain in the custody of election officials and superior court clerks at all times. According to the indictment, the defendants and co-conspirators stole data, including ballot images, voting equipment software, and personal voter information. The stolen data was then distributed to other members of the enterprise, including members in other states. Now, Trump was not indicted for the Coffee County data breach, but Powell and the locals were in a heap of trouble of their own.
Now, if I can interject, if you ever find yourself thinking about taking a plea deal for subverting democracy, you'll probably need a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, my firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If you've been in a car crash, suffered from sexual harassment, or are dealing with Social Security disability or workers' comp issues, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney who can. It's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you don't lose your chance for a full recovery. So just click on the link in the description for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team. The link is below.
Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis charged Powell with 7 felony counts, including racketeering, conspiracy to commit election fraud, conspiracy to commit computer trespass, and conspiracy to defraud the state. At first, Powell vigorously contested the charges, arguing that it should have been removed to federal court. Now, she lost that argument, and trial was slated to begin in mid-October on her own request. However, instead of going to trial on 7 felonies, Powell pled guilty to 6 misdemeanors. Powell pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit theft by taking, and 5 counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with performance of election duties. The plea agreement calls for her to be sentenced to 6 years of probation, pay a $6,000 fine, pay $2,700 in restitution, and to write an apology letter to the citizens of Georgia. The agreement requires her to provide truthful testimony at trial and other proceedings, have no communications with co-defendants, witnesses, or the media until all the cases have concluded, and to give a full proffer and provide documents. In other words, Powell has promised to give Willis the whole enchilada of evidence against her co-defendants. Since Powell pled guilty before the Coffee County locals, she actually might end up getting a better plea deal than the people who followed her off the cliff. In addition to the breach of voting machines in Coffee County, the prosecution will ask her about the White House meeting, where she encouraged Trump to give her the power to investigate voter fraud. In addition to the breach of voting machines in Coffee County, the prosecution will ask her about the White House meeting where she encouraged Trump to give her power to investigate so-called voter fraud. Co-defendants Jeffrey Clark, John Eastman, and Rudy Giuliani will be the hardest hit. Why did Powell plead guilty now? Well, many of the co-defendants in this case were trying to pin everything on her, especially Rudy Giuliani. In August, Rudy's lawyer said, "You can't attach Rudy Giuliani to Sidney Powell's crackpot idea." So one way of viewing this is that she turned on him before he could turn on her. Some people were shocked that Powell pled guilty, but she had more or less admitted her lies after Dominion sued her for defamation. Powell filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit on the grounds that no reasonable person would conclude that the statements were truly statements of fact. Powell had claimed that she had evidence that the election result was the greatest crime of the century, if not the life of the world. But in her motion, she said that reasonable people understand that the language of the political arena, like the language used in labor disputes, is often vituperative, abusive, and inexact. She said that her audience could easily find the evidence and decide for themselves. U.S. District Court Judge Carl Nichols ruled against Powell. The question is whether a reasonable juror could conclude that Powell's statements expressed or implied a verifiably false fact about Dominion. This is not a close call. Judge Nichols, a Trump appointee, also said Powell may have fabricated her affidavits and that her expert reports were unreliable. That expert has also publicly claimed that George Soros, President George H.W. Bush's father, the Muslim Brotherhood, and leftists helped form the deep state in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, which would have been a remarkable feat for Soros, who was born in 1930. Now, Powell wasn't the first domino to fall in Fulton County. That honor is reserved for Scott Hall. Hall was the first Trump defendant in any jurisdiction to make a deal with prosecutors. Hall was charged with several felonies, including conspiracy to commit election fraud, conspiracy to commit computer theft, conspiracy to commit computer trespass, conspiracy to commit computer invasion of privacy, and conspiracy to defraud the state. Hall pled guilty to 5 misdemeanor counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with the performance of an election. Hall will be sentenced to 5 years probation, pay a $5,000 fine, serve 200 hours of community service, and write a letter of apology. He also has to testify against other co-defendants. Now, Hall played a pivotal role in the Coffee County scheme. He was part of a secret text message group that coordinated the data theft. Hall exchanged messages with Coffee County official Eric Cheney about giving the forensics team an open invitation to access voting machines. The indictment alleges that Hall's actions essentially mirrored Powell's, as both of them coordinated Sullivan Strickler's actions. Hall also reached out to Lynn Wood and another lawyer, Carlos Silva, about helping Trump. Hall eventually signed a false affidavit insisting that he had personally observed ballots that appeared to be pre-printed with the selections already made. The affidavit says hundreds of ballots at a time were counted for Biden only. Wood submitted the affidavit as an exhibit in Wood v. Raffensperger, which was one of the doomed Trump lawsuits that tried to stop certification of the Georgia result. Hall presumably knew this affidavit was false when he submitted it. Fani Willis got a third guilty plea when lawyer Ken Chesebro pled guilty right before his trial started. Chesebro is allegedly the architect of the fake electors scheme. Chesebro was the first defendant to plead guilty to a felony. He pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit filing false documents in violation of Georgia Code Section 161020.1, which says it's unlawful to knowingly file, enter, or record any document in a public record or court of the state or of the United States, knowing or having reason to know that such document is false or contains a materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement of representation. The judge ordered Chesebro to serve 5 years of probation, pay $5,000 in restitution, complete 100 hours of community service, write a letter of apology, and testify truthfully at trial. As part of his plea deal, Chesebro admitted that he conspired to put forward fake GOP electors in Georgia with Trump and former Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman. This probably means Chesebro will testify against both Giuliani and Eastman. With Chesebro and Powell pleading guilty, there won't be a trial in Georgia until 2024. That means Trump and the other defendants won't get a preview of the prosecutor's arguments. In cases with multiple co-defendants, early cooperators usually get the best deals. However, some have argued that these deals are especially lenient. So how good were these deals? Well, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis even agreed to put on the record that Chesebro's felony did not constitute a crime of moral turpitude. The moral turpitude language is important in a variety of contexts, and it might help Chesebro maintain his law license. Although the final authority rests with the bar authorities in the jurisdictions where he's licensed to practice. So let's talk about cooperator deals. Typically, prosecutors focus their efforts on convicting the most morally culpable people, the leaders, the planners, the trigger pullers. Prosecutors will try to get less culpable people to flip, the lookouts, the getaway drivers, the flunkies. And prosecutors will virtually always incentivize people to flip by offering the most lenient deals to the first ones in the door. Typically, that means starting at the bottom and working up the ladder. Paul Rosenzweig, a lecturer at George Washington University Law School and ex-deputy assistant secretary for policy at the Department of Homeland Security, said the deals reveal Willis's strategy. This is beginning to look like a classic case of rolling up the small fry to get to the capo. So you would expect the smallest fish to plead first, like the Coffee County officials, for example. But in this case, Chesebro and Powell and Hall are more like lieutenants. They engaged in planning and coordinating. So why did they plead guilty when they did? Well, as far as Powell and Chesebro go, they demanded speedy trials and severing their cases from the rest of the co-defendants. They got their wish, which created an interesting dynamic. Prosecutors and defense attorneys across the country see a pattern play out over and over again. Defendants who are not in pretrial detention can have a really hard time wrapping their heads around a plea deal just up until trial is looming, until the reality of what they're facing is right in front of them. For Chesebro and Powell, their trials were set to begin within days of their pleas. Their own speedy trial demand put pressure on them and prosecutors to figure out a deal well before some of the arguably smaller fish. Now, I don't know whether it was a good idea to give Chesebro and Powell the deals they got. Fani Willis is the one who knows what the evidence shows. She may believe that they will give the most damning evidence against the other co-defendants, especially the big fish himself, Donald Trump. And with her experience in Fulton County, she probably has a good sense for what Chesebro and Powell were really looking at if they were convicted at trial. In other words, what kind of leverage she actually had to get them to plead guilty to lesser charges and cooperate. The RICO charges against Powell, Hall, and Chesebro were dropped. Some people suggest that means the RICO charges were prosecutorial overreach. But it's common for cooperating co-defendants to get dismissals of the most serious charges. Apparently, Powell has already recorded a proffer video with Georgia prosecutors laying out the details of the crime and locking her into a story. If they haven't already, Chesebro and Hall will do the same. With those three locked in and cooperating, we can expect numerous other co-defendants to come to the table and agree to similar deals. But Powell and Chesebro's guilty pleas have implications beyond just Georgia. Special counsel Jack Smith's January 6th indictment of Trump includes descriptions of unindicted co-conspirators whose descriptions match Powell and Chesebro. Mitchell Epner, a former federal prosecutor, puts it simply: neither has plea protection from federal charges. They could be leveraged into becoming cooperating witnesses in the case before Judge Chutkan. Neither would have a viable defense in that case given their Georgia pleas. So even without any kind of coordination, Fani Willis may have just delivered to Jack Smith an early present for the holidays.
And the Christmas presents keep coming because ABC News reported that Mark Meadows received immunity from the special counsel and testified before the grand jury in the election interference case in Washington, D.C. Meadows was indicted in Georgia, but not Washington, D.C. Now, immunity for prosecution means that a person is shielded from criminal prosecution for an offense, and there are two types of immunity. The first is transactional immunity, which protects the witness from being prosecuted for anything they testified about, and the second is called use immunity, which protects the witness from the use of their own testimony against them, but does not prevent the government from using other evidence obtained from independent sources to prosecute that witness. And a grant of immunity removes a person's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So that's why reporters have concluded that Meadows was compelled to testify by a grant of immunity. But there's still lots of unanswered questions about Meadows, and his lawyer has been quick to shoot down claims that he's flipped or is cooperating. ABC reported that Meadows told prosecutors he knew the allegations of voter fraud were false and that he repeatedly told Trump he was wrong. So Meadows, unlike Jenna Ellis, is probably not a cooperating witness. And it remains to be seen whether Meadows will take a deal in Georgia. He was involved in Trump's phone call to Brad Raffensperger, the perfect call, and he was with Trump as the January 6th riot unfolded. And Meadows probably had the best legal argument that his Georgia case should be removed to federal court, although he lost the first round of that case, and his appeal is scheduled to be heard in November. But if he loses that, then maybe he will be willing to take a deal in Georgia. How that will impact his role in the DC case is something we will no doubt be talking about later. And on the other end of the spectrum, Jenna Ellis is the latest to become the personification of the how it started, how it's going meme. This was Jenna Ellis back on September 7th, and here's Jenna Ellis now.
I relied on others, including lawyers with many more years of experience than I, to provide me with true and reliable information, especially since my role involved speaking to the media and to legislators in various states. What I did not do, but should have done, Your Honor, was to make sure that the facts the other lawyers alleged to be true were in fact true. In the frenetic pace of attempting to raise challenges to the election in several states, including Georgia, I failed to do my due diligence. I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse.
Now, the other lawyer with many more years of experience than Ellis is Rudy Giuliani. The indictment alleges that Ellis shadowed Rudy as he made his case for the appointment of fake electors in the swing states. Ellis is accused of soliciting and importuning members of the Georgia legislature to serve as fake electors. She also wrote a legal memorandum addressing to Trump, which, quote, outlined a strategy for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021, concluding that the vice president should not open any of the votes from 6 states, including Georgia. Now, Fonnie Willis charged Ellis under the Georgia RICO statute with solicitation of violating a public officer's oath. And under the terms of the plea deal, Ellis agreed to a single felony count of aiding and abetting false statements and writings. So why did Ellis plead to a felony? Well, probably because she was caught telling specific lies to legislators to convince them to submit a slate of fake electors. And Ellis's lies were very specific, such as claiming that more than 10,000 dead people voted and over 66,000 underage people voted, knowing that that was untrue. But it's not surprising that Ellis is pleading out. We did rank her in the F tier, and possibly because of that, her attempts to fundraise her defense did not go great. Now, that's a whole thing. We don't want people pleading guilty simply because they cannot afford a defense. Here, it's unclear what happened, but also the allegations are reasonably strong. And the Colorado bar has already disciplined Ellis for making 10 false statements while she represented Trump. The bar could seek her disbarment or suspension for the felony conviction. Ellis claimed to have raised $200,000 for her legal defense fund, which is a lot of money, but probably not nearly enough to pay for a years-long defense in multiple fronts. And Ellis's plea puts America's mayor on the hot seat. But now that Powell, Chesebro, and Ellis have taken pleas, hopefully we'll never see them in public again. And I'm sure that they would appreciate if they could scrub their information out of the public domain, which they could do with today's sponsor, Incogni. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen a huge uptick in the amount of spam I'm getting. It's no surprise why. Every year, the number and scope of data breaches worldwide is rising, and you might not know it, but there are hundreds of data brokers that possess and sell your personal information, and their numbers grow every year. These data brokers might have a whole shadow profile on you, including your name, your address, your phone number, shopping habits, possibly even your social security number, all up for the highest bidder. And at best, this leads to scam calls, and at worst, identity theft and doxing. So for example, if you're getting tons of robocalls to your cell phone or calls from scammers like I am basically every day, there's a good chance it's because your data is online. And sometimes it's completely legal, but totally nefarious, like health insurance companies raising their rates because they got access to your personal health data. But that's where Incogni comes in. Incogni fights on your behalf to remove your personal data from data brokers and deals with any objections from their side. All you have to do is create an account and give them approval to work on your behalf. Incogni conducts repeated ongoing removals because if a broker removes your data once, they can collect it again. But Incogni makes sure that your personal information stays off the market for good. And you can see when Incogni does this on your personal dashboard. This is mine. It shows that these 3 sites had data on me that was rated 10 out of 10 on Incogni's sensitivity scale. Those brokers had my data, including my contacts, financial data, and health data. Thankfully, Incogni tells me when the removal requests are complete, so I can breathe easy. It's really fun to watch Incogni get them to delete that info one by one. So if you'd like to give Incogni a try, click on the link below to get 60% off of Incogni when you use the code LegalEagle. Again, to get an exclusive 60% off discount, just click on the link that's on screen right now or down in the description and use the code LegalEagle. After that, click on this link over here for more LegalEagle, or I'll see you in court.